kind of manifested out is through your writing to some extent, of some of the books. Talk a little bit about that. Is that very intentional and deliberate, where you see that's how you've kind of seen your purpose of how you live out that value? One of the ways, I'm sure there's multifaceted, but is writing and writing, because I haven't read the books yet. I saw the latest one, but it looks like, from what I could tell, it swims right in that complexity. It gets into the nuance. It's not just
Yes.
very like prescriptive, or here's what somebody did wrong, here's what they should have done. It's
Right.
acknowledging like this is messy. So talk to me a
Right.
little bit about that, and what
Right.
that process is like for you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm extremely proud of that book. That came from a real life conversation.
Mm,
I've known my daughter's best friend since they were both in third grade,
mm,
and she's become like family to me.
mm,
And a little over 10 years or so ago, she was pregnant,
mm,
and boyfriend wasn't in the picture. Her parents had been divorced for a long time. I had picked her up and I was going to take her to a friend of hers house for something, and she sat in my car and she just wept,
mm,
and just was distraught. And she said the typical things, yeah, I feel, I'm alone, I'm scared, I don't know what's going to happen, my life is ruined, all of those cliches that we hear about. And I sat there and I'm like, okay, number one, I'm not your father, so I can't really speak into your life. I can give you advice, I can help you as best I can. But after the conversation, after I dropped her off, I started thinking about, multiply her by how many thousands of other girls are going through the same thing. Multiply this conversation and this emotion by thousands of others, whether they're teenagers or not. And I got to thinking about it on a larger scale. What we've allowed over the last 50 years is just this screaming from the two extremes
mm,
to dominate the landscape. And that's all we know. We don't even bat an eye anymore
mm,
when something comes up about this subject, that we don't even bat an eye at it. We just like, well, yeah, we expect this. We're just
mm,
screaming at each other,
mm,
da 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 da,
mm,
and who cares about the middle? But I got to thinking, I'm like, if we could, if we could shut out the noise, just close that off, find a quiet, get some people you trust, and sit down, ask some very hard questions of yourself, ask some very difficult questions. You're going to do okay. You're going to be all right.
mm,
As far as the book is concerned, I wrote it from the last line backwards. I
hmm,
knew exactly what I wanted the last line to be,
huh,
and I had to get to that point from the very beginning.
huh,
So what I did was I tried to walk this line, and I'll get to an example in a minute. Walk this line between, I'm not preaching at you, I'm not telling you what to think, I don't tell you what to believe. I simply present the story and say, okay, here's what happened to this girl. Her name's Stacy Kent in the book. Here's what happened to Stacy. Here's what she's going through. She's taken into a dream to see what her child's life might be. She's homeless. Her child is, in prison. Her child is a CEO. Her child is a lawyer. That kind of, all these
mm,
different scenarios. So it was funny because I had some guy want to review the book for me. So I sent him a copy. A couple of weeks later, he messages me back, says, hey, dude, I'm like 40 pages in. Is this an anti-abortion book? Because it sure seems like it. I was like, hold on.
mm.
I'm like, you're 40 pages in.
Keep
You're not even
reading.
into the good stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not even at the good stuff yet. So I'm like, look, it's not anti-abortion. It just is. It's gonna make you think. He's like, okay, fine. I'll keep reading. So, but he was so ensconced in that mindset that
Mm,
he was so pro-abortion about it that
mm,
that's all he could see.
yeah.
And I don't fault him for that. That's what he believes. That's fine. But he messaged me back a couple of days later. Nope, dude, I can't review this. Sorry. I'll send you the $20. Here you go.
Mm,
So I'm like, okay, fine. Well, then another situation where this guy who I met goes to church, very straight-laced Christian guy. He bought two copies, one for him, one for his daughter. They were going to read it together. And I gave him some time. I messaged him. I texted him one time and said, hey, what'd you think? So called him up, and he goes, well, at the beginning there, I don't think you should have had that one scene. It was very uncomfortable. I don't think it was really necessary,
mm,
and all this kind of stuff. So it bothered him
mm,
on the Christian level, right?
mm,
And when I looked at this, and I'm like, okay, that is exactly what I want my book to do.
mhm,
Upset both extremes, where you're
yeah,
so dead set in this mindset. Yes, no, yes, no. We have to strip that down, because it's not as black and white as we'd like it to be.
mm,
I mean, I know everybody has their own personal belief about this, I know everybody has a very emotional attachment to this, but the conversation I had with I call her my chosen daughter. The conversation I had with her, she just needed me to listen.
Mm,
She needed me to be there in that moment. She didn't need me to spout off a bunch of Christianese and
mm, mm,
bash her over the head with the Bible and bully her into saying, "Yeah, you got to go do this. Yeah, you got to go there." Da da da. It's the worst. She didn't need that.
mm,
She needed me to just be there with her. And I think that's the thing that's gotten lost over the last 50 years of this conversation, that we're so ensconced in, we're so firmly entrenched that, like I said, we don't even bat an eye at when
mhm,
people start screaming. It's just the norm.
mhm,
But I think if we could just create a dialogue and just say, you know what, you can believe what you want, that's fine. But what really matters is this girl's going through this situation. And what are we going to do about her? Not our political
mhm,
agenda.
mhm,
What are we going to do about her?
mm,
That's what matters.
mm,
So that's what the book is intending to do, is create that dialogue and cause people to rethink, why do I believe what I believe?
mm.
And I hope it hits its mark.
I mean, you can't help but think back to what you mentioned earlier in the conversation about again, I don't know God. I don't think I know God. Maybe I do know God and I'm not aware that I know it. But the God that I would like to think exists, if God does exist, is very similar to the one you were explaining before, which is like just listens and not intervening, not giving that. And there's a very strong parallel to what you were just explaining, which is
Mhm.
that's the God I would like to think exists as well, which is you have to figure it out for yourself. You have to work through it, and you may not get it right. You may not do it this way or that way. And sure, there's lots of different complexity to it, but it's not rooted in you must do this or punishment,
Mhm.
as you said before. It's more an understanding God, which I would like to think that's the case. So I think it's awesome that you wrote the book in that way. I guess I'm curious though, not to get too far into it, but
Sure.
how do you think about, because I think there's a lot of people that would nod their heads to what you just said and be like, that's beautiful. That's what I think life should be about. That's what we have missed the point that at the end of the day, we're
Right.
trying to
Right.
help people. That's either side, either extreme is doing it because they think we're going to make the world better and we're
Right.
going to
Yeah.
help
They
people.
their intent is good.
Their
You know,
intent
I
is
mean,
good.
right. I understand where they're coming from. It's just the way it's working out.
The way it's working out. Right. I think what some of those people might say back is like, but I have to, because if I don't, then the other side is going to win or whatever it might be. And then somebody's going to be hurt. And that gets back to that complexity of life we were talking about before, where it's
Mhm.
like, I think a lot of people would say, I want to just listen. I want to let it play out. I want to remember the person and the individual. But regardless of which side you sit on, the court just whatever ruling, they passed the ruling they passed.
Sure.
Previously, it was a different one. And there's this sensation of I have to do something about that because there's too
Mhm.
much danger in it. How do you balance that? Not judging, not preaching, just trying to help and be there for somebody and care about a person, but at the same time, taking some action to do what you think is better for the world. And it could be in the abortion subject, could be others.
Mhm.
That's a delicate balance. And I think, again, it parallels back to God in some ways.
Right.
Maybe what
Right.
God's trying to strike. How do you think about that?